Detective Mark Rayner had always walked with a kind of confidence that made people move out of his way. Wherever he went, his shiny badge caught the light, reminding everyone who he was: a man of authority, a man above the rules. In his early days, he had joined the police force with the dream of serving justice. But over the years, that dream turned into pride. The respect people gave him slowly turned into fear, and he liked it that way. Power became his addiction, and his badge became his armor. Mark had solved many cases in the past, earning awards, promotions, and fame within the department. But that success slowly changed him. He began to think he could do anything he wanted, that no one could touch him. If anyone complained or tried to question his actions, he would silence them with his position. His deep voice, cold eyes, and strong presence made people nervous. Even his fellow officers avoided crossing him because they knew he had friends in high places. Mark's arrogance grew so big that he no longer saw himself as a protector of the law. He saw himself as the law itself. At the station, younger officers admired him, but also feared him. He never smiled, never apologized, and never admitted a mistake. He believed that wearing a badge gave him the right to control anyone, anytime. When people looked at him with respect, he felt powerful. When they looked at him with fear, he felt even stronger. The line between right and wrong slowly disappeared for him. He started using his power not to protect people, but to protect himself. There were rumors about Mark, whispers that he had covered up evidence, forced confessions, and punished people who stood against him. But no one dared to prove it. Every time someone came close, he found a way to make the problem disappear. His charm worked on the high-ropes, his threats worked on the weak, and his badge worked on everyone else. He had built a wall of power around himself, and for years, no one had been able to break it. Mark believed the world was simple. There were people who gave orders and people who followed them. He saw himself as the man who could never lose, unbeatable, unstoppable, untouchable. He thought the law was his tool, not his boundary. When he walked through the station halls, he didn't see fellow officers, he saw soldiers under his command. Even when he was wrong, he found a way to make himself right. One afternoon, while reviewing a stack of reports, Mark received a file that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. It was a complaint filed by a woman named Sarah Collins, a local school teacher. She had accused an officer of misconduct during an arrest. Mark didn't care about the details. In his mind, no civilian had the right to question the police, especially not someone like her. He read the file with a smirk and said to himself, "Another one trying to play hero." He decided to handle the case personally. For him, it wasn't about justice, it was about power. He wanted to teach Sarah a lesson she would never forget. He told his team to dig up information on her, to find anything that could embarrass or silence her. Mark wasn't interested in truth. He only wanted control. When his team warned him that the woman seemed determined, he laughed. "There's no one I can't handle," he said confidently. But deep down, Mark had started believing in his own lies. He thought his badge made him invincible, that it would always protect him from consequences. Years of unchecked power had blinded him. He couldn't imagine a world where someone could stand up to him and win. In his eyes, the courtroom, the police department, even the city itself, they all belonged to him. That night, he sat in his office, looking at his reflection in the dark window. The badge on his chest gleamed faintly under the desk light. He smiled at it like it was an old friend. "You and me," he whispered. "We're untouchable." He believed that as long as he wore that badge, no one could challenge him. But the truth was, his badge no longer represented justice. It represented his pride. And pride, as fate often shows, comes before the fall. Outside the station, rain began to fall, tapping against the glass like tiny warnings he couldn't hear. Somewhere across town, Sarah Collins was sitting quietly in her small apartment, holding the same file that Mark had read earlier. Unlike Mark, she didn't have power or connections. But she had something stronger: truth, determination, and the courage to fight back. She didn't know yet how dangerous the road ahead would be. But she also didn't know that she was about to become the first person to stand up against the man who thought he was unbeatable. Mark slept soundly that night, completely unaware that his greatest challenge was about to begin. For years, he had built a world where fear ruled and his word was final. But soon, he would meet someone who didn't bow to power. And that encounter would shake the very foundation of everything he believed in. The untouchable officer had no idea the badge he wore so proudly would soon become the reason for his downfall. Sarah Collins had never been the kind of woman who liked attention. She lived a quiet life, teaching children at a small public school and spending her evenings grading papers or reading by her window. Her days were simple, peaceful, and predictably, till one afternoon changed everything. That day, she witnessed something that shook her faith in the system she had always trusted. She saw a police officer, one of the city's most powerful men. Detective Mark Rayner mistreat a young man during an arrest outside her school. She saw the fear in the boy's eyes, and she couldn't stay silent. So she did what she thought was right. She filed a complaint at first. Sarah believed justice would follow. She thought the department would investigate, that truth would win, and that the badge truly stood for protection and fairness. But she was wrong. What she didn't know was that the man she was accusing wasn't just any officer, he was the most feared one in the force. When the file landed on Mark Rayner's desk, he took it as a personal insult. To him, Sarah wasn't a citizen with rights. She was a threat to his authority. Mark decided to make her regret it. Within days, Sarah noticed strange things happening. People from the department called her school, asking questions about her past. A neighbor mentioned that police cars had been parked near her street at odd hours. Anonymous letters appeared in her mailbox, warning her to stay quiet. Her friends advised her to drop the complaint. But Sarah couldn't. Deep down, she knew if she gave up now, he'd keep doing the same to others. One evening, she received an official notice. Mark Rayner had filed a defamation case against her, claiming she had damaged his reputation with false accusations. When Sarah read the papers, her hands trembled. The man she had complained about was now dragging her to court. For a moment, fear almost consumed her. He was powerful, connected, and experienced. She was just a schoolteacher with limited resources. But then she remembered the young man's terrified face that day, and something inside her refused to break. If he thinks he can scare me, she whispered to herself, he's wrong.
As the court date approached, Sarah gathered every piece of evidence she could find. She reached out to people who had suffered because of Mark but were too afraid to speak. Slowly, she started connecting the dots. Old reports, ignored complaints, missing body cam footage. Everything pointed toward one truth. Mark Rayner wasn't a hero. He was a man who had been hiding behind his badge for years. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Mark entered with his usual confidence. He looked at Sarah with a cold smirk, as if the outcome was already written. Everyone expected her to be nervous, to crumble under pressure. But when she stood before the judge, she didn't shake. Her voice was calm, steady, and strong. She spoke with the kind of honesty that cuts deeper than any threat. Mark's lawyer tried to twist her words, but Sarah didn't back down. Every time they tried to corner her, she brought out another document, another witness, another piece of truth that chipped away at Mark's power. The man who once ruled with fear began to look uneasy. His arrogance faded a little each time Sarah exposed a detail he thought no one would ever find. By the end of the session, whispers filled the courtroom. Reporters started taking interest. People who once praised Mark were now questioning him. And Sarah, the woman he had tried to destroy, stood taller than ever. For the first time, Mark realized he wasn't facing a weak woman. He was facing someone he couldn't intimidate. That night, when Sarah returned home, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face showed exhaustion but also quiet strength. She had survived the first battle, but she knew the war wasn't over. Mark still had power, and he wasn't going to let go easily. Still, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. She knew that truth was on her side, and no matter how long it took, she would fight until justice was done. Across the city, Mark sat in his office, replaying the courtroom scenes in his mind. For the first time in years, he had been challenged, and by someone he never expected. He told himself she was lucky this time, that he'd win the next round. But deep down, a small fear crept into his heart. He couldn't admit it, but he had underestimated her. Sarah Collins was no ordinary woman. She was the one person who saw through his mask, and that terrified him. Sarah, on the other hand, knew her fight had just begun. She wasn't after revenge. She was after truth. And as the days went on, more cracks began to appear in Mark's perfect image. People started to talk. Old victims came forward. The system he had controlled for so long was slowly turning against him. What had started as a simple complaint was now a storm he couldn't stop. And Sarah, the woman he thought he could silence, had become the voice that the whole city was finally listening to. The courtroom was silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Detective Mark Rayner, the man who once believed he was above the law. The tension in the air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Mark sat stiffly, his once proud shoulders tense, his jaw clenched tight. The badge that used to gleam on his chest was now gone. Instead of pride, there was only the cold weight of fear resting on him. Across the room sat Sarah Collins, calm but determined. Her eyes didn't show hatred, they showed strength. She had fought too long to let fear win now. The final day of the trial had arrived. Weeks of testimonies, documents, and hidden truths had led to this moment. Everyone had seen the mighty detective's image slowly fall apart piece by piece. The witnesses who once feared him now stood up to speak against him. Some were victims, some were fellow officers, each one revealing another layer of the corruption Mark had hidden behind his badge. His secret web of power was unraveling faster than he could rebuild it. Mark tried to defend himself. He said it was all lies, that he was being framed, that Sarah had twisted the story for revenge. But every word he said only made him sound more desperate. When the prosecutor played a recording of a conversation between Mark and a subordinate, where he clearly ordered the manipulation of evidence, the courtroom gasped. Mark froze. The arrogance that once filled his face disappeared. His voice cracked as he tried to explain, but the truth was too strong to fight. Sarah watched him silently. She remembered how scared she had been in the beginning, how she doubted herself, how she almost gave up. But now, seeing the man who tried to destroy her crumble under the weight of his own lies, she realized something powerful. Courage doesn't come from strength or authority. It comes from doing what's right even when you're terrified. The judge's voice broke the silence. His words were steady, echoing through the room. Detective Mark Rayner is found guilty of evidence tampering, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. For a moment, Mark didn't move. It was as if he couldn't believe that someone had finally beaten him. The courtroom burst into whispers, cameras flashed, and reporters rushed to the front. The once unbeatable man had fallen. His badge, the symbol of his pride, was officially taken from him that day. As officers escorted him out, Mark looked back at Sarah. His eyes were full of anger, regret, and disbelief. He wanted to hate her, but deep down, he knew she wasn't the villain in his story. He was. The same power he had abused for years had led to his destruction. The same badge that once protected him had become the reason for his downfall. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Reporters surrounded Sarah, asking how it felt to win. She didn't smile or celebrate. Instead, she simply said, "It was never about winning. It was about truth." Her voice carried calm power, the kind that no badge or title could ever match. People who had once feared speaking out against the police now felt inspired. They saw in her the strength to stand against corruption. Meanwhile, in a cold cell miles away, Mark sat alone. The silence that used to comfort him now haunted him. He thought about the choices he made, the people he hurt, and the power he had wasted. He had built his life believing he was untouchable, but now he finally understood the truth. No one is above justice. He realized too late that a badge doesn't make a man unbeatable. Integrity does, and that was something he had lost long ago. Sarah's life slowly returned to normal, but she was no longer the same quiet teacher she once was. She had faced her greatest fear and won. Her courage became a story that spread beyond her city, shared in classrooms, newsrooms, and online forums as a reminder that one voice can change everything. She continued to teach, but now her lessons carried a deeper message, that truth may bend, but it never breaks. One rainy evening, Sarah walked past the courthouse again. She looked at the steps where it all began, feeling a strange peace. The memories were still heavy, but the fear was gone. She knew she had done something that mattered. Somewhere in that same city, Mark probably sat behind bars, still wondering how everything went wrong, but Sarah knew the answer. He had brought the wrong woman to court. In the end, it wasn't power, fear, or a badge that defined who won. It was courage. The courage of a woman who stood alone against the system and proved that truth, no matter how small, is always stronger than arrogance. Mark Rayner once thought his badge made him unbeatable, but the truth was simple. It was never the badge that made a person powerful. It was the heart behind the fight for what's right, and that Sarah Collins had in abundance.